arrangements, financial difficulties, and lack of foreign policy experience. This development comes as we're also learning Kushner has lost his top secret security clearance, a major development tonight. Caitlin Collins is out front. And Caitlin, what are White House officials doing right now to ease the tension that clearly is now here between Jared Kushner and John Kelly, the chief of staff, who is the one who made this decision to strip this top secret clearance?
Certainly a significant amount of tension between those two here, Erin. And we know that White House officials worked over the last few weeks to try to identify a way that Jared Kushner could stay on in the role he has now with the portfolio he has now without personally appealing to the president for some kind of waiver so he could continue to access that highly classified information. But with our reporting today, we show that Jared Kushner was downgraded from a top secret interim security clearance to a secret interim security clearance, just like the rest of the people who are also operating under a similar one. And though the White House is stressing that Jared Kushner is going to be fine, that he's going to be able to operate in the same retrospect that he has been for the past 13 months, dealing with the Middle East, dealing with Mexico, that's pretty much only the White House saying that. And Jared Kushner's daily life in the West Wing is about to look a lot different, because we know that he was one of the few top officials who requested almost more access to classified information than anyone else. We also know that he had access to the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief, a document that has the most pressing information from around the world for the president. He reads it regularly. We know that as well. So he will not have access to either of those, and he also won't be able to sit in on the same meetings that he has been so far. We know that the president is aware of the tension between Jared Kushner and John Kelly, but Erin, it's hard to see how the life is not a lot different in the West Wing for Jared Kushner from now on.
Yeah, very different. And I think a lot of things you point out there, Caitlin, so crucial, including that he was the biggest consumer, the biggest requester of top secret information, somebody who used it, read it voraciously. Thank you so much, Caitlin. And out front now, the former director of national intelligence and retired lieutenant general in the United States Air Force, James Clapper. Great to have you with me. General, I appreciate your time as always. Look, Jared Kushner had top secret security clearance, and he used it. He was the top requester of information in the White House. He had the access to the Presidential Daily Brief, and now that access is stripped, downgraded. What's your reaction, General?
Well, first, I think Chief of Staff John Kelly did the right thing, and I gather that Kushner's clearance was one of perhaps 120 or 130 or so, that at least that's what's been reported, that were in a similar status that did not have access to SCI, the highest level of clearance access. So my impression is that John Kelly made a decision across the board with everyone that was affected to include Kushner, which is the right judgment. Now, as has been stated earlier, the president ultimately is the ultimate clearance granter, and so if he wants to make an exception and still give his son-in-law access, he can do that.
Now, the Washington Post is reporting a couple of crucial things, General. One of them that the officials from 4 countries, at least 4, discussed manipulating Kushner in part because of his financial troubles and his inexperience on foreign policy. How concerning is that? And, we understand those countries included places like China and countries in the Middle East.
Well, it's potentially very concerning. I'm not in a position to confirm that reporting, but let's just assume it is valid.
Yes.
And that is precisely, I think, one of the complexities in doing a background investigation on Kushner, because of the potential financial complications that or dealings he may have with these countries, who in turn could use that as leverage to influence policy outcomes by the United States. Now, I'm given to understand that the actual background investigation phase of this will be done relatively soon, within the month. And if that's true, then it will still be up to the White House, some senior official, presumably John Kelly, to then adjudicate what background investigation has turned up and actually make the ultimate decision as to whether or not he would be granted a clearance based on the results of that investigation.
How big of a deal is this development, though? When you think about it, a senior advisor to the president, right, among his portfolio, right, dealing with China, peace in the Mideast, had traveled, had meetings with kings and dictators, and all of the access that he has to suddenly lose this clearance. I mean, is this an unprecedented moment?
It is, and it really puts him in a position, if this sticks, of dealing with way less than a full deck in all these sensitive portfolios. Just take Mideast as a case in point. Having some familiarity with the situation there, I just think it would be very difficult to do anything meaningful without having access to the classified intelligence at the highest levels to understand the subtleties and nuances of what's going on out there. Not to mention dealing with another portfolio of China. And has also been indicated that it isn't just a question of access to classified information and what he can read or not. Another complexity is attending any kind of meetings. The White House Situation Room is typically set at the TSSCI level. And so if he were to attend a meeting and he's only cleared for secret, that really inhibits the conduct of business.
I want to ask you also, General, about the NSA Director, Admiral Mike Rogers, today. He was on Capitol Hill testifying, specifically asked about U.S. efforts to stop Russian interference in elections at the origin of the attack, right, to bring it to the Russians. He said he has not received authority from the President of the United States to do this. And I just wanted to play, I'm going to play for you, I'm sorry. I want to play for you what he said, and also the White House press secretary trying to muddy the water and almost deny what he said. Here he is, and then Sarah Sanders.
The mission teams, particularly at the origin of these attacks, have the authority to do so.
If granted the authority, and I don't have the day-to-day authority to do that, if granted the authority.
So you would need basically to be directed by the President through the Secretary of Defense.
Yes, sir. In fact, I mentioned that in my statement.
Have you been directed to do so, given the strategic threat that faces the United States and the significant consequences you recognize already?
No, I have not.
He's in charge of Cyber Command. Why not give him the authority?
Nobody is denying him the authority.
Of course, the reality of it is she's trying to punt the issue and muddy the water, General, by saying no one's denying him the authority. But, of course, the White House has to give it to him. They have to go out and actively say, you have the authority to do this on a day-to-day basis. How big of a deal is it that the President of the United States is not giving Mike Rogers this authority?
Well, it's both stunning and emblematic. I mean, this is consistent with the President's singular indifference to the threat posed by Russia, and that started when Mike Rogers was one of the four of us as a group who briefed then President-elect Trump on January 6th of last year about this, and he for whatever reason just can't accept it. And what's required here is a whole of government, if not whole of society approach here, and that can only be led from the White House. So good on Mike Rogers for telling truth to power here, and he is not in a position to freelance, particularly when it involves active measures. NSA has a passive collection mission which continues 7/24, 365, but to actually go out and do an attack at the origin, as he put it, at the source. He has to have authority for that, and I wouldn't be surprised if he hasn't even been asked for options. As far as press secretary, well, she ought to get the Ginger Rogers Award for tap dancing. That was a real artful dodge, because after 13 months into this administration, this should have been this is a no-brainer. Should have been authorized a year ago.
All right. Thank you very much, General Clapper. As always, I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Erin.
The next breaking news, an investigation underway at this hour. There was a suspicious letter that has made 11 people ill at a U.S. military base, 3 of them in the hospital tonight. The breaking details this hour, and new details about the Florida school shooting breaking tonight. The gunman may have had plans for a bigger massacre. Well, with Kushner. One source close to the White House saying it is, quote, very humiliating. Looks like General Kelly won this one. Another GOP source telling CNN the downgrade, quote, directly undercuts Jared's main job as White House envoy to the Middle East and greatly reduces his national security influence. Out front now, former ethics lawyer for President George W. Bush, Richard Painter, national political reporter for Politico, Eliana Johnson, and former director of the Nixon Presidential Library, Tim Naftali. And Tim, let me start with you. Obviously, Raj Shah doesn't want to talk about security clearances, but this was a stunning blow to Jared Kushner. And to the tight orbit around this president today.
This is a stunning blow to President Trump. It was a surprise when he basically delegated this decision to General Kelly. After all, President Trump, like any president before him, could have decided that he'd put aside the concerns of the intelligence community and give his son-in-law a security clearance. So he could have done this. He decided not to. It looked as if, for a while, Jared Kushner was backstopping the president. He was reading the materials the president didn't want to read. Now he can't read
the daily
those,
briefing and all of these top secret things.
So this means that the president, who generally is uncomfortable with people outside of his family orbit, is now going to rely on people that are not related to him or married to members of his family. This is a big deal, and it's striking to me that the president has said nothing. He must be fuming.
I mean, Eliana, I just want to play again the way the president played this, right? He said, John Kelly, it's up to you. And I know you'll make the right decision. Now, whether that was a wink, wink, nod, nod, or pressure or what, let me just play again what the president said to John Kelly about this crucial security decision.
I will let General Kelly make that decision, and he's going to do what's right for the country. And I have no doubt he'll make the right decision.
Now, Eliana, you first broke the story about Kushner losing his top secret security clearance late today. What are you hearing at this hour?
You know, Erin, my understanding was the president was hesitant to intervene in the security clearance process because he was aware of the blowback that he would suffer if he simply granted Kushner a waiver and gave him a permanent clearance. And it's so interesting because he wasn't conscious of the blowback that he suffered for bringing his daughter and son-in-law into the White House in the first place. Nonetheless, it's noteworthy that General Kelly downgraded everybody in the White House who was operating on a top secret security clearance and made them operate on a secret security clearance, including Jared Kushner. So he's trying to address the fallout from the scandal surrounding Staff Secretary Rob Porter that occurred a couple of weeks ago, and is not paying any attention to the fact that this is impacting Jared Kushner. What security officials told me is that Jared Kushner now does not have access to the sort of intelligence that a normal person in his role would have access to. So he is now really operating with his hands tied behind his back. And
Richard, that's the crucial question, as Jeff Zeleny raised and Raj Shah did not want to weigh in on, which is, can Jared Kushner even stay in the White House and do his job with his portfolio at this point?
Well, his portfolio never should have been foreign policy to begin with. He doesn't know anything about foreign policy other than perhaps luxury vacation travel and arranging loans from Russian banks and financing from Chinese conglomerates for his own family. But he's not a foreign policy expert. He never should have been entrusted with the Middle East. And he shouldn't be in that arena at all to begin with. I don't know what his job portfolio should be in the White House. I really don't think he ought to be there. But this is no great loss because I don't think he was a useful foreign policy advisor. This president needs to get some foreign policy experts in this White House because there aren't any, or there are very few, except for in the National Security Council has a handful of people. But he really needs some foreign policy advice. He's not getting it. The State Department is losing people right and left, and we are in serious trouble.
And yet this is a guy, Tim, Jared Kushner, you know, who reportedly was hanging out with Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia till 4 o'clock in the morning. You know, had sort of fancied himself, I think, with a lot of people who are in that 35 to early 40s age range in the Middle East, has sort of become their friend. And he could become the peace broker because he had these various friendships. We know, Tim, that he left out contacts with foreigners, including that crucial Trump meeting Trump Tower meeting, right, with Natalia Veselnitskaya, with the dirt on Hillary Clinton. He was then forced to revise his national security application form multiple times because this information was left out. And as I mentioned, the National Security Advisor, the Washington Post is reporting, is saying Jared Kushner had contact with foreign officials that he did not report the way that he should have. What is the significance of all of this? These, whatever you want to call them, omissions, lies, we do not know what the right word is at this point.
Well, there are two things. One, presidents can use people without TSSCI clearance to send messages.
Yes.
Presidents have done that in the past. So he can continue to carry messages. It's how foreigners will view him that matters now. They know that he's been brought down a notch.
Yes.
This is very humiliating. He is therefore less interesting in one respect to them because he won't know what he used to know. On the other hand, they can manipulate him because if he still wants to be a player, despite the fact he doesn't have clearances,
they can dangle things out there.
They can build him up. So he is, I think, in a much more vulnerable position now. And I wonder how long he's going to stay in the White House, frankly.
And Eliana, do you have any reporting on that crucial question of what next for Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump?
I don't have any reporting on what their future is in the White House, but I will say that today's news, not only of his downgraded security clearance, but of his extensive contacts with foreign governments and of what foreign governments are trying to how they're trying to leverage him, has prompted a rash of speculation about just how long they're going to be around. Today was truly, I was terming it Jared Kushner's no good, very bad day, because on top of those two pieces of news, we had a report that he potentially violated campaign laws by weighing in with an official statement on a political campaign. And it just seemed that every piece of news coming out today adversely implicated him. And on top of that, his most trusted confidant in the White House, or one of them, Josh Rafael, news emerged today that he is leaving the White House in the coming months. So it does seem that Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump are losing confidence and access by the day.
And Richard, the Washington Post also reporting officials in at least four foreign countries, including China, have tried to manipulate Kushner through his business arrangements. And at the least, right, I don't know if anyone remembers this. Let me just show it to everybody again. You may remember last May, Kushner's sister, this is in China, reportedly went to China to get $150 million financing for a housing development, Kushner family project. And as part of the presentation, she specifically and explicitly touted the family ties and Jared's role in the White House. You even see the name on the screen. Richard, when you put all this together, do you think Jared Kushner tried to use his role to benefit himself financially?
I don't know what he tried to do, but other than the fact that he doesn't know anything about foreign policy, another reason why he shouldn't be in foreign policy is he has financial arrangements all over the world. He's been going all over the world begging for money from the Chinese and the deals with the Russians, and then he's involved with the Middle East peace negotiations. He's got investments in Israel and financial ties there. He has too many financial conflicts of interest. And if he participates in a government matter that has a direct and predictable effect on his financial interest, that's a crime under 18 United States Code 208. And he better not do that or he's going to end up in big trouble. So he ought to stay out of foreign policy with that type of investment portfolio. And I think he'll look seriously at getting out of the White House.
We'll see what happens next. But obviously a stunning development tonight. Thank you all. And next, why isn't the U.S. disrupting Russia's hacking of elections? So today, the NSA chief testified and said Donald Trump, the president of the United States, has not given him the order to do so. And more breaking news, the latest on the suspicious letter that has made 11 people ill at a U.S. military base that's developing right now. 3 of them are in the hospital at this hour.
One of the most powerful.
3 now in the hospital tonight. A suspicious letter opened at a military base outside of Washington to blame. The breaking details ahead. Let's go out front. And good evening to all. I'm ERIN BRUNNET. Out front this evening, the breaking news. Kushner's top secret security clearance stripped. The president's senior White House advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner, tonight without the clearance that allowed him access to the highest level of classified information in the United States. Information that he has had access to daily since the president's inauguration more than a year ago. And just moments ago, our Phil Mattingly You see this here, Jared Kushner. He found him actually in the Capitol for a meeting, followed him for about 4 minutes, asking about the stunning development. Kushner refusing to say anything or answer questions. This is a major setback for the president's senior advisor. He is one of the few people who actually sees the nation's top secret daily security briefing every single day. He is a man who has been at the president's side from day one, a man whose responsibilities include, but are not even limited to, brokering peace in the Middle East, relations with China, Mexico, and Canada, overseeing the Office of American Innovation, ending drug addiction. That's just a few of the things in his portfolio. And that security clearance slashed tonight as Bob Mueller, the special counsel, investigates Kushner's links to Russia and China and Middle East dictatorships. And tonight, more breaking news on this. The Washington Post is reporting that at least 4 countries, the United Arab Emirates, China, Israel, and Mexico, privately discussed ways to manipulate Kushner, using his financial difficulties and political inexperience to their advantage. The Post also reporting that Kushner did not officially report contacts with foreign officials. It's a stunning set of developments at this hour and a major setback to a man at the center of President Trump's world, a man that Trump constantly praises.
Jared is a very, very successful real estate man in New York. I'm proud of Jared.
Jared is a very successful real estate person, but I actually think he likes politics more than he likes real estate.
Her husband, Jared, very, very smart, good guy.
There's a lot to get to tonight on this developing story. I want to go straight to Jeff Zeleny at the White House. And Jeff, what is the reaction inside the White House to this tonight?
Erin, there's no question about it. People around this building walk on eggshells when Jared Kushner's name is mentioned. He is the first among equals, of course, a senior advisor, but perhaps more importantly, a son-in-law. But today's sort of bombshell reality that he no longer has that top secret security clearance, coupled with that Washington Post reporting, is raising questions here about what his future may exactly be. Now, his lawyer, of course, put out a statement saying he's going to keep doing his job as he's been instructed to work on Middle East peace and other matters. But the reality here is, without the security clearance, that top secret security clearance, he will be unable to do exactly the job that he has been doing. Now, he had an ability to ask the president to intervene here. I am told by a White House official he did not want special treatment. And the president signaled last Friday that it was up to White House Chief of Staff John Kelly to make the decision on his future. It appears that it actually happened like that Jared Kushner did not ask for special treatment. But Erin, on a day like this, when Jared Kushner was on Capitol Hill, as you saw, and then he was holding a conversation about prison reform, it was clear that he did not necessarily expect this, but he's going to keep doing his job, at least for now. But that is the question here tonight, Erin. How long will Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump, of course, stay at this White House? Will they stick it out through this, or does this security clearance matter change his interest here in working at the White House? Erin.
All right, thank you very much, Jeff. And on that, let's try to get some answers. Out front now with the White House Principal Deputy Press Secretary Raj Shah. Raj, good to have you back with me tonight. A day of some stunning and very, very quick-moving developments. Jared Kushner stripped of access to the nation's top secrets with the downgrade in his security clearance. Were you shocked by this, Raj?
Well, Erin, good evening, and thanks for having me on. The White House has been saying the same thing about this matter and related matters for rather a number of months now. We do not comment on security clearances. We don't address them, acknowledge or refute any of the reporting you're referencing, and frankly, we can't comment beyond that.
So the question here, though, and this is crucial, when you talk about the White House and what all of you are doing, what this administration is trying to accomplish, Jared Kushner is at the center of that. He is one of the top people in the White House. Senior advisor, son-in-law. You just heard the president among several of many comments he has said glowingly of Jared. Tasked with peace in the Middle East, working on China, working with Mexico. One of the few people who actually reads the top secret presidential daily brief every single day. Jared Kushner is at the center, Raj, of some of the biggest decisions impacting Americans right now. He can't do his job without the top security clearance. So what will happen to him now?
Well, again, I'm not going to address your speculation. What I will say is you just mentioned a number of statements. I'll tell you one more from just a little over a week ago in which the Chief of Staff said, pursuant to his memo about interim and permanent security clearances, that he has full confidence in Jared Kushner's ability to do his job, to address the issues of Israeli-Palestinian peace, to also address the issue of U.S.-Mexico relations. So, he's doing a great job on behalf of the president, and he's going to continue in his role.
So he can continue in his role if he can't be briefed on what's going on with Iran or terror threats or anything like that? I mean, how can you do Middle East peace if you don't have top secret
Again, that's making assumptions and answering hypotheticals that we're not prepared to address. We do not comment on security clearances, and that is the policy of the White House.
So according to the Washington Post, Raj, citing current and former U.S. officials familiar with intelligence on this, officials in at least 4 countries, and I don't know if you heard me mention this, but I want to make sure I list them again. United Arab Emirates, China, Israel, and Mexico privately discussed ways to manipulate Kushner by taking advantage of his financial difficulties and his lack of foreign policy experience. Does this concern you, this report?
Well, I'm certainly not going to address leaks of possibly classified information that former or current administration or non-administration officials are engaged in. Again, we do take leaks of classified information very seriously. This appears to be another one just like that, and we're simply not going to address it.
Right. I understand you're upset about the leak, but what about the substance?
Well, what I'm saying is I don't know that to be true, and that would be a matter that is classified, and as a result, we're not going to be discussing it.
The Washington Post is also reporting that H.R. McMaster, of course, with whom you also work every day, the president's national security advisor, has learned that Kushner had contacts with foreign officials, that not only did Kushner not coordinate through the National Security Council, he did not officially report them. Do you have a comment on that and the accuracy of that report?
I do know that, the National Security Council has addressed that and said that, Jared Kushner's contacts with foreign officials have and will continue to run through the NSC.
So if there is truth to this, that he did not coordinate anything through the NSC or an official report, if there is something to that, which the Washington Post is reporting, would that be acceptable, Raj?
Aaron, I'll stop you right there. You're asking me about hypotheticals that I don't know to be true based on classified information, which we wouldn't be able to address. So,
right,
again,
but it's a pretty simple question. If something happened, is it acceptable or is it not acceptable?
Again, all of any senior official's activities on policy matters, on interactions with members of Congress or with foreign officials need to be run through the appropriate offices and individuals within the White House and within the agencies throughout government. And that's being done, and that will continue to be done. But I'm not going to address leaks from potentially classified information that is being speculated about in the press.
Right. And of course, I understand you don't like leaks, but of course, our concern is when the leaks are of such a crucial nature, what would be the reaction of this White House to that reality?
Aaron, but you have a bunch of officials claiming certain things are true. I've seen all sorts of reports in the Washington Post, on CNN's website, elsewhere, that are not true going back over the last year. So I would simply state that we're not going to address, speculation about potentially classified information.
So this does follow, Raj, on our reporting that the special counsel Bob Mueller is looking at Kushner's efforts specifically to secure financing for the Kushner companies from foreign investors, China and Qatar among them, during the presidential transition, including that building, 666 here in New York, which is reeling from financial difficulties. The question for you, Raj, is a very simple one, but a very important one. Because of who Jared Kushner is and the central role that he holds, can you promise that he did not at any time use his role with President Trump to try to bail out his own personal finances?
Well, I'll say that we have been cooperating with the special counsel, with their process. We've been providing information, witnesses, et cetera, voluntarily with them. We do not comment on specific individuals, witnesses, or information with respect to the special counsel's process. And it just goes to what the president has been saying from day one. There's no collusion. There's no obstruction. There's going to be no finding of wrongdoing. I think that applies.
But if you're
to all
willing to
White
say
House
there's
officials.
no collusion, why can't you answer the question directly? Can you, or can you not say that Jared Kushner did or did not ever use his role to benefit himself?
What I am saying, and what the White House has consistently said, is that our communications with the special counsel and its investigative practices and the areas of concern that it's looking into are going to be addressed with the special counsel and not with the media.
The president has said and been very clear that the decision on Jared Kushner's security clearance is up to John Kelly, his chief of staff. That he made it very clear, he'll make the right decision, whatever the implications of what that decision would be. I just wanted to play exactly what the president said for you, Raj. Here he is.
I will let General Kelly make that decision, and he's going to do what's right for the country, and I have no doubt he'll make the right decision.
Raj, is the president happy with this decision to strip Jared Kushner of his top secret clearance?
Again, that's assuming information that we're not addressing or not commenting on. We do not comment on security clearances, and I can repeat myself over and over, but if we want to move on to something else that I can't answer, we can do that as well.
Does the president stand behind any decision that John Kelly made on that front today?
Again, as I've said over and over again, I'll continue to repeat it, we're not going to be commenting on security clearances.
All right, Raj Shah, thank you very much. I appreciate your time as always. Thanks for coming on.
All right, thank you.
And next, the scales of power may just have been tipped in the chief of staff's favor. He stood up and did what he wanted to do. Did John Kelly just win in the showdown with Jared Kushner? Plus the breaking news, the head of the NSA says he has not been given the authority from the President of the United States to stop Russian interference in American elections. It's a stunning admission. Why not? And new details tonight.
Son-in-law and senior advisor. No power to act. The head of the National Security Agency says President Trump hasn't given him the authority to fight Russian election interference. Tonight, escalating fears that the U.S. is failing to prevent the Kremlin from meddling in the U.S. midterm elections. Stonewalling? White House Communications Director Hope Hicks faces the House Intelligence Committee and refuses to answer some key questions in the Russia investigation. We're standing by for new information about her testimony. And more ammunition. We're learning that the Florida school gunman had many more rounds in his rifle and may have had a plan to cause even more carnage. Why did he stop firing and walk away? We want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking tonight, the president's son-in-law, senior advisor Jared Kushner, has been stripped of his top secret security clearance and his access to the most important U.S. intelligence report, the president's daily briefing. The senior advisor paying a price for still failing to qualify for full security clearances. Kushner's troubles mounting tonight as the Washington Post reports that officials in at least 4 countries have been privately discussing ways to manipulate Kushner. I'll get reaction from Senator Chris Coons. He's a Democrat on the Judiciary and Foreign Relations Committees. And our correspondents and analysts, they're all standing by. First, let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Jim Acosta. Jim, this is a significant loss for Kushner.
It absolutely is, Wolf. The president, we should point out, ignored questions about his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, losing his top secret security clearance here at the White House earlier today. The questions are coming in response to a change made here at the White House by Chief of Staff John Kelly that will affect White House staffers who are operating on interim top secret security clearances. As a result, those employees, including Kushner, will have their access to sensitive materials limited. Earlier this month, we first reported that more than 100 White House staffers were working with interim security clearances. Last Friday, the president said he would leave it up to the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, to clean up that security clearance process in the wake of the Rob Porter scandal here. Here's what the president had to say last Friday.
General Kelly respects Jared a lot, and General Kelly will make that call. I won't make that call. I will let the general, who's right here, make that call. I will let General Kelly make that decision, and he's going to do what's right for the country, and I have no doubt he'll make the right decision.
Now, as for Jared Kushner's security clearance being reduced, sources close to the White House are bluntly telling CNN that Chief of Staff John Kelly's move, quote, directly undercuts the president's son-in-law in his role as an envoy to the Middle East peace process. One source telling us, Wolf, that this keeps Kushner out of key meetings over here at the White House. And as you know, Wolf, at the White House, access equals influence and power. Even if you are the president's son-in-law, we should also point out Kushner's attorney released a statement on the president's son-in-law and his security clearance issue. We can put this up on screen, just a portion of this from Abby Lowell. who is Jared Kushner's attorney. As to his security clearance, Mr. Kushner has done more than what is expected of him in this process. Now, we should also point out, Wolf, as for this Washington Post report that has come out this evening that says foreign governments, including Israel, were looking at ways to manipulate Kushner by taking advantage of his business dealings. A spokesperson for Kushner's lawyer also put out a statement saying they're not going to respond to that. But as you can see, Wolf, just an avalanche of negative information coming out about the president's son-in-law and his security clearance issue here at the White House this evening, Wolf.
Yeah, the Washington Post citing 4 countries that supposedly had ways that they thought they could influence Kushner: Israel, the United Arab Emirates, China, and Mexico. We're going to stay on top of this and work our sources. Jim Acosta at the White House, thanks very much. And now to the Russia investigation. We're waiting to hear from members of the House Intelligence Committee. They've been behind closed doors now for hours, trying and sometimes failing to get answers from the White House Communications Director, Hope Hicks. Let's go to our senior congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, up on Capitol Hill. Manu, we're told Hicks has refused to answer certain questions. What's going on right now?
Yeah, she first came to the House Intelligence Committee at 10 a.m., and there have been back and forth with members of the committee after she initially refused to answer questions about her time during the transition and her time at the White House under the direction of the White House. Now, that generated some significant pushback from members of both sides of the aisle, particularly after she had answered questions about the transition period to this in a separate meeting with the Senate Intelligence Committee. So late in the day, today, Wolf, we are told that she started to answer some questions about topics during the transition, but she still is not answering questions about her time at the White House.
Plan to answer all the questions today?
Tonight, White House Communications Director Hope Hicks refusing to answer key questions in the Russia probe, frustrating Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee.
I have less hope we'll get to all the answers.
Was there been a subpoena issued for her?
No.
Should there be?
Yes.
Why is that?
With anyone who doesn't answer questions, they ought to be subpoenaed, brought forth.
But late in the day, a shift as Hicks began to answer questions about the transition period, as she did during a previous appearance before the Senate Intelligence Committee.
She's answering questions for the transition, too.
She is starting to answer questions for that?
Yeah.
Yet Hicks was still unwilling to answer questions about her time at the White House. And that follows former White House Chief Strategist Steve Bannon, who previously told the committee he was instructed by the White House to invoke executive privilege on behalf of President Trump over matters that occurred after the campaign. And former Trump campaign manager Corey Lewandowski also wouldn't discuss topics after he left the campaign in June 2016.
In the case of Bannon, it was a insupportable and overbroad claim, and he needs to be held in contempt, and we're still pushing the majority to do what they, I think, were committed to doing. With Lewandowski, we need to subpoena him to bring him back because he's now refusing to cooperate further.
The House Intelligence Committee has also been fighting over the FBI surveillance of former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page, leading to a war of memos over why he was targeted. The memo from the committee's ranking Democrat Adam Schiff, released over the weekend, states the FBI was concerned Page was being recruited by the Russians. A claim Page denied in an interview with CNN's Chris Cuomo.
No one in Russia has ever tried to work me. All the evidence I've seen so far, Chris, indicates that there was much more interference by the U.S. government compared to the Russian government.
The president this morning tweeting again, calling the Russia investigation a witch hunt. But on Capitol Hill today, National Security Agency Director Mike Rogers warned Congress that he has not been granted the authority by President Trump to disrupt Russian election hacking operations where they originate.
We have not taken on the Russians yet. We're watching them intrude in our elections, spread misinformation, become more sophisticated, try to achieve strategic objectives that you have recognized, and we're just essentially sitting back and waiting.
I don't know if I would characterize it as we're sitting back and waiting. It's probably fair to say that we have not opted to engage in some of the same behaviors that we are seeing, if I could just keep it at that.
The White House is pushing back on Rogers' claim.
Nobody is denying him the authority. We're looking at a number of different ways that we can put pressure. Look, this president, as I told you last week, has been much tougher on Russia than his predecessor.
Yet a new CNN poll shows about 6 in 10 Americans say the president is not taking the investigation into Russian efforts to influence the U.S. elections seriously enough. And they also lack confidence the president is doing enough to prevent foreign interference in future elections. So, Wolf, as Hope Hicks is not answering questions about her time in the White House in her testimony before the House Intelligence Committee, there are a lot of questions about what the committee is going to do to enforce a subpoena over Steve Bannon and his refusal to answer questions about the transition period and during the campaign season, and about whether in his time at the White House and whether he will actually be held in contempt. The Republicans are not yet committing to that. Several Republican members on the committee today saying that they don't know yet whether or not Bannon will be held in contempt. Mike Conway, who's the Republican leading the Russia investigation, said that he needs to speak to Speaker Paul Ryan first before making the decision about whether or not to hold Bannon in contempt, as Democrats in particular are pushing. And questions, too, about Corey Lewandowski. Democrats have demanded a subpoena for him to reappear before the committee and answer those questions he refused to answer before, but he has refused to come back, and Republicans are not yet willing to subpoena him. Uncertain what they will do about Hope Hicks now that she is not answering questions about her time in the White House, even though she's answering some questions about the time during the transition, Wolf.
Manu Raju up on Capitol Hill. Thank you very much. Let's turn back to the news on Jared Kushner's security clearance significantly downgraded. We're joined by Senator Chris Coons. He's a Democrat who serves on both the Judiciary and Foreign Relations committees. Senator Coons, thanks very much for joining us. So what's your reaction to this Washington Post report and the headline was Kushner's overseas contacts raise concerns as foreign officials seek leverage. He had, on an interim basis, top secret security clearances, now just secret security clearances. And as you know, there's a significant difference.
There is. Wolf, this is a really striking development and long overdue. I've just returned from a bipartisan trip to the Middle East. One of the issues that was raised in a number of meetings that we attended was expectations, hopes, or concerns about the administration's long-awaited peace plan for the Middle East, something that Jared Kushner has had a central role in crafting. The fact that he's been deprived of his top secret clearance, he's been downgraded because of concerns about his failure to be fully forthcoming about his entanglements in his business side and his previous contacts, suggests that he really is not in a position to continue to carry forward the significant role in this White House that he's been entrusted with. For him to be the person who's carrying forward an important peace plan in the Middle East at the same time that he lacks a top security clearance, I just don't think that's workable going forward.
It's not just the Middle East. He's dealing with Mexico. He's dealing with China. He's dealing with a whole bunch of countries. So what do you want the president to do?
I think the president should appoint someone else, preferably someone with relevant senior experience in diplomacy and international affairs. And I think he should find another opportunity for Jared Kushner to serve either in his administration or to continue to pursue his private business interests.
The president does have the authority, if he wants to, on his own, to say he does have access to top secret SCI information. The president could do that if he wanted to, although the other day he said he was going to leave it up to his White House chief of staff, General Kelly, to decide. I
think he made the right choice in having his chief of staff make that decision and not allowing his own personal relationship with Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, to cloud his judgment about whether or not he should continue to have access to the very top secrets of the American people.
What if the president were to overturn this decision by General Kelly?
I think that'd be a very bad step by the president. I think it would show continued conflation of personal and family interests with national interests.
So you're deeply worried about this right now?
I'm concerned that this shows an ongoing pattern of failure to take seriously the protection of national security concerns by the very inner circle in the Trump administration because there are overlapping personal and professional and national concerns.
Let me get your thoughts on Hope Hicks, the White House communications director, another top advisor, aide to the president, very close to the president. Hope Hicks appearing for hours, more than 7-8 hours today behind closed doors before the House Intelligence Committee, answering questions about the campaign, and we're now told answering questions about the transition, but refusing to answer questions about what has gone on in the White House over these past 13 months of the Trump administration. What's your reaction?
Well, previously, both Steve Bannon and Corey Lewandowski refused to answer questions claiming executive privilege. And as was seen in a clip from Adam Schiff just a few minutes ago on this show, that's an executive privilege that's not theirs to exert. So my hunch is that Hope Hicks may also find herself in some trouble with the committee, depending on what the reasons are why she's been refusing to answer questions about her role in the Trump White House.
Well, if the Trump White House were to announce that they were exerting executive privilege, then she would have, right now they haven't technically done that, but if they were to do that, then what?
That might well shield her from questions from Congress about activities within the White House, but it depends. It depends what exact matter they're going after. I do think you can't shield illegal action behind executive privilege. I think that's an arguable proposition. And I think Robert Mueller's investigation, which is looking into potential obstruction of justice, may also have questions for Ms. Hicks, depending on how this goes in front of the House Intelligence Committee.
Does it bother you at all, as it has some, that Hope Hicks is the White House communications director, but she really doesn't communicate publicly with the American public? She doesn't answer questions publicly. Most people wouldn't even recognize her voice. You're smiling, right?
It's funny because earlier today, as I was getting some briefings from my own communications people, they said Hope Hicks has been testifying for hours, and I said, what's her role? And they said she's the communications director. I was unclear that she was the White House communications director for exactly that reason. She is not frequently seen publicly commenting on behalf of the White House. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen her play the role that is typical for a White House communications director.
A big picture, what are these late-breaking developments? Hope Hicks refusing to testify, refusing to answer questions, even behind closed doors, from members of the House Intelligence Committee about her time in the White House. She's answering questions about the campaign and the transition and this Jared Kushner development. What does it tell you about accountability or developments at the White House right now?
What I'm more broadly concerned about is that the president continues to tweet that the investigation by Robert Mueller is a witch hunt. We had testimony by Admiral Rogers, who runs the National Security Agency, earlier today in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee, that the president is failing to take seriously enough the threat to the United States from Russian interference, not just in our last election, but likely in our next election. I think there is a broader theme here, Wolf, about a lack of action on behalf of the national interest, our national security interest, our interest in protecting our next elections, and in having people at the very highest levels in the White House who are transparent and accountable.
Senator Coons, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Wolf.
We have an update on another breaking story we're following right now. It's happening over at a U.S. military base just outside of Washington, D.C. We're now told 11 people are being treated after falling ill after a suspicious letter came to Joint Base Meier-Henderson Hall in Arlington, Virginia. That's just outside the nation's capital. Let's go to our Pentagon correspondent, Barbara Starr. She's been working her sources for us. Barbara, what are you hearing now?
Wolf, what we are hearing is that 11 people felt ill after some type of letter was opened at an administrative building at this military base. Of the 11 who felt ill, 3 were transported to the hospital, and at this hour, the local fire department is saying that all 3 of those people are in stable condition. Even as you can see there, emergency personnel continue to remain on the scene, trying to determine exactly what happened at Joint Base Fort Meier-Henderson Hall. This is a local military installation here in Washington, D.C. Basically, it's just a short walk, if you will, away from the Pentagon here near Arlington National Cemetery on the Virginia side of the Potomac River. It is a major location here in the area. There are a number of various kinds of military units and personnel that are based there and serve there for local reasons here in the area. These are not combat forces in Washington, D.C. They perform local functions here in the area. And some type of letter was opened and people began to feel ill. What we don't know is exactly what's transpired here. They're going to have to test it, see what substance may have been involved and what is causing the symptoms. The initial information we had was that 3 people had symptoms, including burning hands and 1 bloody nose, so taken to the hospital for medical attention. Local fire is on the scene. We were told a short time ago, FBI personnel also monitoring it because, of course, as they would in any case, but this is happening tonight in the metropolitan Washington, D.C. area. So obviously a lot of concern. People go in and out of this military base all day long. They're going to have to figure out exactly, Wolf, what transpired here.
Normally, Barbara, at a base like this, wouldn't letters arriving go through some sort of security before they're disseminated?
That's right. At any, we see it at so many companies these days, at military installations, and especially here in Washington, D.C., mail is screened and treated, if you will, before it is delivered to its final destination on a base or at a facility. We're being told initially this was opened at an administrative type facility on the base. So we really don't know yet whether it was screened. It probably should have been. And whether the substance, of course, was hazardous, what type of substance it may have been that caused all of this. Would it have been even caught by the kind of screening there is? These are all questions we simply don't know the answers to. And it's why in every one of these instances you do see law enforcement and hazardous material specialists move in very quickly to try and test it, see what they are dealing with, how many people touched it, what symptoms they have, and what substance